Then talking about adult learning principles, we talk about experiential learning. You might have seen this before as well, that when hearing or listening, people only remember 20% of what they heard or listened to. People remember 30% of what they saw. So if you see something, you remember it more, a better way. And if you hear and see something, you remember 50% of that. And if you discuss a topic with somebody, if you share your ideas, express your views, you remember about 70% of what was discussed. And if you apply something practically and make a personal experience, so imagine you're telling somebody how to drive a car. Okay, so you tell them verbally how you drive a car, how the gear is shifted, where the pedal is. But if you make them sit in a car, they might not know which pedal you are trying to talk about, which is the gear lever, because they have not seen it earlier. Now, if you make them sit in a car besides you and you're driving, and you're telling them that this is how the gear is shifted, this is what a steering wheel is, this is where the brake pedal is, this is where an accelerator pedal is. So they have seen it. Next time when they sit in the car, they would be able to answer most of the questions. But now you discuss with them after this. What did you see when I was driving? Did you see I was shifting the gears? Did you also notice that when I was slowing down, I was shifting the gears? When I was speeding up, I was also shifting the gears. So they would ask questions from you. Yeah, why were you doing that, for example? Yes, I remember you shifted the gear, but what did you do? Which gear did you went into? Did you went straight from gear number 5 to gear number 1? Or did you went from gear number 5 to 4 and then 3 to 2? So doing a discussion with them would make them understand better. And now, if you let them drive the car, then they will do some experiences and then they will remember a lot of things. So always remember, experiential learning means making them experience something. So there are 5 steps in the experiential learning cycle. Number 1 is to do an action, an experience on a trial basis. Then number 2 is to publish the results or let them explain to you how they did it. Number 3 is to look back and ask them how they started it, what were the lessons learned, how did they do it, for example, what were the routes they took, what processes they took to come to these results, and let them explain the results. Number 4 is generalization. Ask them if they have experienced this kind of situation before. What did they do if they experienced this in the real life? What would they do when they experience it again in the real life? Would you make any changes to your process, for example? That is when it comes to application, looking forward. Or best is to make them experience it in real life. So now you have done in step number 1 to 4 on the trial basis. Now you experience it in the real life. I'll give you an example. Let's take an example of eco mapping. So you imagine you are teaching people how to conduct an eco map and how to identify energy NPOs using an eco map. So number 1 would be ask participants to develop an eco map for the textile company. Obviously, before this, you would show them an example of the eco map, tell them what an eco map looks like, what kind of symbols you might have used, but then ask them to develop it for the textile company case, for one case study. Then participants present their eco maps and plan them, they tell you, okay, these are the NPOs we have identified, and this is how we decided the symbols, what does each symbol mean, for example, and then discuss with them in step number 3, how did they come to these results? Have they identified all the NPOs? Have they missed any NPO, for example? How could they improve their eco maps? Or if they have done something unexpectedly well, appreciate them, tell them that even as a trainer, you did not know this, and they have brought up a new idea, for example, applaud them in this case. Then in number 4, think, does this relate to own situation? Ask them, have you ever been to a factory? Have you ever seen this kind of NPOs? Do you think this kind of a process like eco mapping could be applied to a factory floor? And what kind of changes would you make if you go to factory? How would you improve this process, for example? And then number 5, repeat the concepts or ideas in one's own factory. So make them go to their own factory now and ask them to develop eco maps of their own processes and identify their own NPOs. So this is how doing a practice, discussing the practice, and then letting them do it in the practical way. We did a training need assessment with you and identified 6 different subjects. There were different cards inside. So what would you like to learn? Then we translated these into learning objectives. So we had 8 learning objectives. One was to relate to the elements of energy management system as per international guidelines, then relate to energy audit methodology, mapping material and energy flows in the textile companies, assessing and conducting energy balance of the processes and utilities, proposing energy efficiency measures, conducting financial pre-feasibility assessment, advising clients on developing energy objectives, targets, action plans, advising clients on developing energy teams, competence development, and then providing training to the client to be able to provide training to clients using experiential learning cycle and adult learning principles. So these were the learning objectives that we developed. Based on these learning objectives, internally, we developed some topics that could be covered to complete each of the learning objectives. So sometimes participants or companies give you such learning needs which you cannot fulfill. So it is important that you stay within your scope and boundaries if the time does not permit to expand the scope. So this is one way of doing it. What is a moderation plan? It provides information on target audience, learning objectives, mode of delivery, training schedule, and then most importantly, time plan of the training. And what does it describe? Titles of the sessions. So each session would have its own title. How much time would it take? Then what content will be covered in that each of the sessions? So maybe one learning objective needs to be delivered in 2, 3, or 4 sessions, not only in one session, in one go. You might need to do an introductory session, then you might need to perform some demonstration, give some more technical information, then ask them to perform it, and after performing, give them more feedback, improve their performance, and then ask them to perform again. So there could be multiple stages that you have to take them through to achieve one learning objective. So key points to discuss or deliver, summary of activities to be performed, what activities will be performed, what key messages do we want to deliver in the final summary session or the reflection session. Then here we detail the mode of delivery. So each of these content that we are identifying, or the key point or the activities that we're identifying, how will each of the activity be delivered now, rather than only giving the overall delivery? Which training materials will be used? Which slide number? What is the title of the slide? Which handout are we going to give? From which slide till which slide are we going to present in this session? For example, we have one presentation which has 30 slides, and we are dividing these 30 slides in 2 sessions. So slide number 1 till slide number 10 in session number 1, and slide number 11 till slide number 13 session number 2. And then responsibilities. Do we have one trainer? Do we have other facilitators? Do we have a support staff? Who's going to do what? So what are the responsibilities of everybody? What arrangements do we need to make to ensure that we are able to conduct this session successfully? So all these things, are we going to use Zoom, Miro? Are we doing a physical training? If we are doing a physical training, do we need markers, flip charts, meta plan cards, boards, pin boards? So what do we actually need? Do we need a projector? Okay, so there could be many things that you need. If you are doing a game, for example, a training game, what items do you need for that training game? So all these things we need to write down in detail in this moderation plan. Showing you one example. So you can see, for example, this was the first session we had, the day one of the session. For example, we start 30 minutes with welcome and introduction. The content and remarks was that we do a welcome, then we do a quick review of agenda, we take a group photo, and responsibilities we had mentioned here, who is going to do what. In materials, what do we need? We need a list of participants, workshop materials, agenda, Miro board for this review, for example. Then we come to session number 1, which would last 70 minutes. The title is to establish common understanding of framework for energy efficiency. And before break, we discuss familiarizing with framework of international and national obligations. And in that, we're going to provide overview of relevant international standards and guidelines. Then we're going to talk about requirements and plans of prominent textile and garment buyers, brands on energy and climate change. And we need our presentation number 1101, and the title is EE Overview. In the second part of this session, which lasts 30 minutes, we continue the discussion and we do a reflection in the plenary. So a plenary discussion where participants will take views of the participants on the international requirements. Participants share their experience of working with textile companies and what they observe in this regard, and contribution from participants to add country specific requirements. And what do we need for that? We need Miro frame to record responses. I will show another detailed version of this to you now. I will show you the one I'm using right now and show you how I'm using it in addition to what I just showed you. So for example, here we started in the morning. So I have written Vietnam time, and because I'm in a different time zone, I have also written Pakistan time, then time in minutes, then the outcome or objectives that we want to achieve. Our first objective is to start into day 2. We started with a quick reflection of day 1, clarified open questions if you had any, explained the agenda of day 2. This was my responsibility, so I write my short initials SB Salman Bhatt. Materials we needed was the agenda for workshop number 3, and then this last column I use as my notes. So what is actually happening in this session? So for example, here I write shared templates with participants, some examples. Red group presented their group work on root cause analysis and action planning. Blue group did not present anything. Then next session was supposed to start at 10:30. It would last for 60 minutes. But actually it started at 10:45 because this discussion above became longer. And in this session, the title was providing advisory services to the clients, where we had to discuss. Main topic was considering good advisory practices. We did a self-reflection on brainstorming by a participant, which we continued from previous day. And we had some discussion today as well. Then group work on characteristics of a good consultant and trainer. It would be a 15-minute group work and 10 minutes discussion on the results. The PowerPoint presentation would be used, engaging with clients. Then we need one Miro frame for everybody and one breakout room for each group. We would display a countdown watch for timekeeping, and there is a handout which was up, which will be sent to you, that is essential client briefing form. In my notes, I said that we started at 10:45. And to begin with, I also showed the presentation from day 1, which was getting ready for change again, so that we build the context. So this was not planned earlier, but when I asked you a question in the beginning, do you remember first day we discussed this readiness to change? Since you did not say yes, so I changed my plan immediately and showed you this thing. And then going forward, for example, we had this discussion on developing awareness, and we did a plenary discussion on disaster training. We had a lunch break, and then we had awareness and competence again, knowing our target audience, adult learning principles, and all these things, all these topics that we discussed. For example, you can see here in this session, I planned to show you only 6 slides. After 6 slides, I would go for the plenary discussion on the disaster training, for which I would need a Miro board. Then in the next session, I would use slides number 7 to 30 here, and there's no Miro board that I need here, nothing else. It's only me who's conducting this training. Then we would conduct another activity to assess the training needs. Here I write, okay, we wanted to start it at 13:30, but we started actually 1 hour later and finished it at 15:24. Here we also needed a Miro frame, a breakout room, a display, countdown watch, for example, and then the break and also on. So that is how you can see that I write every detail of it. I do not send all these details to the participants, but I write these details for myself. For participants, I normally prepare a simpler version where these times are not mentioned and these display countdown timer and these kind of things are not mentioned there. But I actually tell them just an overview of what they could expect from these sessions. So this is how we develop, and we start usually this. If I take you to the first page, we write down overall structure and training elements. Okay, we'll have a 5 days TOT, then we'll have a company application, then we'll consolidate the workshop with a follow-up workshop, and what will be the purpose of each of these activities. Then going forward, we had an orientation session on 14th. So as you can see, this is my preparation. I turn them green if I have already uploaded these materials in the shared folder. And if these are not green, for example, this is black, this means that I have not uploaded this in the frame. And then the red colors or yellow colors where I write them are usually to identify important aspects of the session. So that is how I develop this session. And for example, here I write the purpose with detail, expected learning outcomes. So these are the learning outcomes or the learning objectives. Then which tools I'm going to share. Are there any benchmarks or reading materials that I'm going to provide, or anything that the participant would read on their own? I would just refer to them. So all the reference materials I list here. And then I start with day 1 and day 2 and day 3. This is how I do it. And every day at the end, I make changes to the moderation plan of the day that has gone past based on the experience I had. And then I make changes to the next day as well, what I'm going to do according to this. So this is one example of a moderation plan. There could be other ways of developing it as well. So how to use this? Before the workshop, the moderation plan can be used to structure the workshop with regard to the participants' learning objectives, the contents, the materials that we're going to use, the time requirements, then writing a script of the workshop. This is like writing a session plan or a lesson plan, dividing each of the learning objectives into learning elements, into smaller steps, smaller activities. Then it can be used to plan and check if all the required materials are available for the workshop, distribution of responsibilities among facilitators, so everybody knows whose responsibility is what. Then as a basis of communication among the facilitators, so facilitators or trainers reach a common understanding or with regard to objectives, contents, logistics, materials, possible critical points, and then to define possible criteria for mutual feedback. What would we do? How would we close the session? At the end of the day, what would we discuss with each other? And already decide on how to evaluate the workshop. During the workshop, it again serves as a script. So we follow this script, follow the sequence and steps of the exercises. Then it also helps us to avoid to forget the contents or important points. So if we have written there somewhere, what do we want to discuss at the end of a workshop? What are the key messages that we want to convey? We will never forget. I always, during the session or at the end of the session, open the moderation plan in my screen and have a look at it. Okay, am I forgetting something? What did I want to discuss here? So it's always better to write it down. Then to do a proper time management and take adaptive measures. As I said earlier, yes, write a time, but you can see that in my moderation plan, I was writing that I have delayed it for 1 hour or 30 minutes. And what is the time of starting? And this adaptation is to ensure that the topic we're discussing is conveyed properly or not. If we only follow the planned time and we do not give any flexibility, actually we end up having a disaster training, because then participants do not get the right message across. So let them have their time, but also think of which are the important aspects that we must convey and which are the aspects which we can even skip. So sometimes I have planned 2 or 3 group works. When I think that I have less time, I skip the least important of those group works and spend more time on the important ones. And then it also serves as a basis of daily evaluation at the end of each day for mutual feedback. We reflect with each other what went well, what did not go so well, what do we need to improve next day. And then based on that, we do a verbal evaluation, and then we make changes to the next day and identify potential modification that we need to make for the next day. After the workshop, it serves as a final evaluation, and then to verify whether we have achieved the objectives, were we able to complete all the contents. It is important to note the real time requirements and adaptation. So for example, this time I made a plan for your training and I have written my notes where it took longer. So next time when I will conduct the same training, I will make changes. And for example, I planned a session to take 60 minutes, but it took 90 minutes. So next time I will keep 90 minutes in that session, or I will see where I can cut time to keep it within 60 minutes and check whether the expected results or effects were achieved. Analyze the reasons why we were not able to achieve certain topics, complete certain topics, or do certain exercises, for example, or achieve some objectives, and develop measures for the next time. And then this also facilitates for the future workshop. So when I have to conduct a workshop similar to this one next time, I don't have to spend so many days in preparation. I already have a moderation plan developed. I will just pull it out, make some minor changes, spend a half day or one day only, and my content is ready. And to provide valuable information to the facilitators network as well. So I will share this with other trainers that are within my network in my company, or other friends who do similar trainings, and they also share with me their ideas or lessons learned when we are gathered together in a club or over a cup of tea. We share with each other what happened. We don't only talk about tea, but we also talk about a little bit of work, maybe 10 minutes, and then we talk about tea and coffee and snacks. So that is how we can use a moderation plan. Is you can see the last paragraph, which talks about how I will reflect upon this session. Okay, you can see that session number 001 is going to finish here after the mini break, and then I talk about the reflection. And in the reflection, I just don't write that reflection on the topic, but also type right here, how will the reflection be done, who will be asked to say what. So that is how I would like to write in detail how the reflection will be done.